My brothers and sisters, let me begin with something uncomfortable but necessary. Many people think they are strong, but they panic the moment they are alone. They think they trust Allah, but their hearts are tied to people. They say, I'm fine, but only when someone is watching, approving, validating. And that is why Allah, out of His mercy, sometimes removes people from your life, not to punish you, but to teach you where your real strength comes from. When you stop needing people, something powerful happens inside you. Not arrogance, not isolation, but clarity, stability, dignity. Let us talk about what truly happens when your heart detaches from dependence on creation and reattaches itself to the Creator. Many of us don't realize this, but excessive need for people weakens the soul in ways we rarely notice until damage is already done. It doesn't start loudly, it starts quietly. You begin checking your phone too often. You start feeling uneasy when messages go unanswered. Your mood rises and falls based on how others treat you. Slowly, without realizing it, your inner stability is no longer coming from faith or self-control, but from external reactions. This is where the weakness begins. When your happiness depends on people, their presence, their praise, their attention, you have unknowingly handed them authority over your emotional state. You may think you are just being social, loving, or attached, but in reality, you have outsourced your peace. Today, they smile at you, and your heart feels light. Tomorrow, they are busy, distant, or distracted, and suddenly your chest feels heavy. Nothing real has changed except who you are relying on. That is not strength. That is emotional dependency. Islam does not teach this kind of fragility. Islam does not raise believers to be emotionally fragile creatures constantly shaken by human behavior. Islam teaches strength rooted in humility, not strength borrowed from people. There is a massive difference. Human beings are inconsistent by nature. They forget, they disappoint, they change, they get tired, they prioritize themselves. Expecting emotional stability from something so unstable is not wisdom, it is self-harm. When you depend on people for emotional safety, you live in a permanent state of anxiety. You read into tone, you overanalyze silence, you interpret delays as rejection. Your mind becomes restless, constantly asking, what did I do wrong, even when nothing is wrong at all? This is how people lose their peace without losing anything external. The Prophet ﷺ was surrounded by people, supported by companions, loved deeply, but his heart was never dependent on them. His emotional anchor was not human approval, it was Allah. That is why betrayal did not break him, insults did not shake him, loneliness did not weaken him, because his strength did not come from numbers, it came from certainty. This is a lesson many miss. Being surrounded by people does not mean needing them. Loving people does not mean being emotionally tied to their behavior. Islam does not ask you to cut people off, it asks you to cut unhealthy dependence. When you stop needing people emotionally, something surprising happens. You don't become cold. You don't become harsh. You don't lose compassion. You become balanced. You still love, but without desperation. You still care, but without anxiety. You still give, but without expectation. This is freedom. Freedom is not isolation. Freedom is not arrogance. Freedom is not pretending you don't need anyone. Freedom is knowing that your emotional stability does not collapse when people change. Most emotional pain people experience is not caused by others. It is caused by attachment to expectations. You expect consistency from humans, even though Allah never promised it. You expect loyalty even though people are tested. You expect understanding even though everyone sees the world through their own lens. When those expectations are not met, pain follows. But here is the uncomfortable truth. The pain is not proof of love, it is proof of dependence. And dependence weakens the soul. A believer with a weak soul reacts emotionally to everything. They over-explain themselves. They chase closure. They seek validation. They fear abandonment more than they fear displeasing Allah. This is dangerous because the moment you fear losing people more than losing your inner peace, you compromise yourself. You soften truth to be liked. You tolerate disrespect to avoid loneliness. You silence your conscience to keep connections alive. This is how people slowly lose their dignity, one compromise at a time. When you stop needing people, you stop negotiating your worth. You no longer beg for attention, affection, or recognition. You stop chasing those who don't choose you. You stop explaining yourself to those who are committed to misunderstanding you. Not because you are proud, but because you are grounded. And grounding changes everything. A grounded person is calm. They don't panic when people leave. They don't become bitter when ignored. They don't chase when unvalued. Their self-worth is not up for negotiation. This calmness is often misunderstood. People think it is arrogance or coldness. In reality, it is emotional discipline. And discipline is strength. When your heart is free from emotional dependency, you move differently, you listen more, you speak less, you observe before reacting, you respond instead of reacting, you don't rush to fill silence, you don't rush to explain yourself. You are no longer enslaved by expectations, and that is where true strength begins, not in controlling others, but in mastering yourself. A heart that is free does not beg. A heart that is anchored does not collapse. A heart that relies on Allah does not break easily. This is why freedom of the heart is the beginning of real strength, not the kind that shouts, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that stands firm even when alone. And that strength is quiet, focused, and very powerful. One of the hardest realities to accept is this: not everyone who leaves your life is a loss. Some departures are mercy in disguise. When people walk away, when support disappears, when familiar voices go silent, the first reaction of the heart is panic. You replay conversations, you blame yourself, you ask questions that have no answers. Why did they change? Why did they leave? Why am I alone? But rarely do we ask the more important question: what was my heart attached to before they left? Allah, in His wisdom, sees attachments we do not. He sees when the heart leans too heavily on people, when trust subtly shifts from Him to creation, when emotional safety is being sourced from humans instead of the Creator. And because Allah is merciful, He intervenes, not always gently, not always comfortably, but always purposefully. Sometimes Allah removes people not because they are bad, but because you were relying on them too much. You were calling them before you made dua. You were seeking their reassurance before seeking Allah's guidance. You were measuring your worth through their presence, and that imbalance needed correction. Loss forces honesty. When people are gone, distractions fade, noise disappears, the heart is exposed, and in that silence, Allah calls you back to where you were always meant to stand. With Him, many people think reliance on Allah means saying the words, "I trust Allah." But real reliance is tested only when people are no longer available, when there is no shoulder to lean on, no one to reassure you, no one to validate your pain. That is when tawakkul becomes real. Before that, it is often just a concept. When Allah removes people, it hurts because dependence was present. If there was no attachment, there would be no pain. The pain itself is proof of where the heart was tied. This is not condemnation, it is diagnosis. And diagnosis is the first step to healing. Think about how many times difficulty pushed you closer to Allah. How many tears were shed only because there was no one else to turn to. How many prayers were sincere only because all other doors were closed. Those moments were not accidents. Allah closes doors, so you stop knocking on the wrong ones. If people had stayed, you might never have grown. If support had remained constant, your faith might have stayed shallow. If validation was always available, your reliance on Allah might never have matured. Comfort delays growth. Loss accelerates it. This is why some of the strongest believers are those who were once alone, not abandoned, but redirected. When you stop needing people, your relationship with Allah changes. Dua becomes honest, not formal. Salah becomes refuge, not routine. Quran becomes guidance, not background sound. Because now you are no longer splitting your dependence. You are no longer trusting Allah and people. You are trusting Allah alone, and Allah is enough. Many struggle here because they misunderstand this lesson. They think Allah is asking them to hate people, cut everyone off, or live isolated. That is not the teaching. Allah is not removing people to empty your life. He is removing them to recenter it. Once the heart is corrected, people may return or new ones may enter, but now they arrive in the right position, not as emotional anchors, but as companions on a path already anchored in faith. This is crucial. If Allah gives you people while your heart is weak, they become idols of comfort. If Allah gives you people after your heart is strong, they become blessings. The order matters. Many people beg Allah to bring someone back, not realizing Allah is trying to build something inside them first. They want relief, not growth. But Allah prioritizes your soul over your comfort, and that is love. When you stop needing people, you stop begging Allah to preserve attachments at any cost. You start asking Him to preserve your iman, your dignity, your inner stability. You stop saying, Ya Allah, don't take them away. You start saying, Ya Allah, don't let my heart depend on anything that can be taken away. That is maturity. And maturity changes how loss feels. It still hurts, but it no longer destroys. It still stings, but it no longer defines you. Because now you understand, Allah did not remove support to weaken you. He removed it to strengthen your reliance. And reliance on Allah produces a different kind of strength. Quiet, steady, unshakable. A strength that does not collapse when people leave. A strength that does not panic in uncertainty. A strength that does not beg to be held together. This is why some people become calmer after loss. Not because they stopped caring, but because they stopped clinging. When you stop needing people, Allah fills the space they once occupied, not with emptiness, but with contentment. And contentment is something no human can give you. People may come and go. Support may rise and fall. Relationships may change, but Allah remains. And once the heart truly understands that, loneliness loses its power. You may be alone, but you are not lost. You may be unsupported, but you are not unstable. You may be quiet, but you are not weak. Allah removed what you leaned on so you could stand properly. And once you stand properly, nothing shakes you easily again. That is not loss. That is return. Solitude is one of the most misunderstood experiences in a person's life, because people assume that being alone automatically means something is wrong, when in reality, being alone is often the first moment when truth finally has space to appear. When there are no conversations to distract you, no messages to check, no people to perform for, the mind begins to settle and the heart begins to speak. And that is when many people become uncomfortable, because they are finally forced to face themselves without filters. Most people are not afraid of silence itself. They are afraid of what silence exposes. When you are constantly surrounded by people, your flaws are masked by interaction and your weaknesses are hidden behind roles you play. You become the friend, the helper, the listener, the entertainer, the achiever, and those identities give you temporary confidence because they distract you from unresolved issues within. But when you are alone, none of those labels matter anymore. There is no one to impress and no one to blame. What remains is your character, your intentions, your discipline, and your relationship with Allah. And that is why solitude feels heavy for those who have neglected their inner life. Many people say they want peace, but they fill every quiet moment with noise, because peace requires honesty and honesty requires courage. In solitude, excuses stop working. You can no longer say that people distracted you or circumstances forced you. You begin to see patterns clearly, why you react emotionally, why certain things trigger you, why your faith weakens in some moments and strengthens in others. This awareness is not meant to shame you, it is meant to refine you. Allah allows solitude not to punish but to reveal, because what is revealed can be corrected and what is ignored continues to control you. When you stop needing people and learn to sit comfortably in solitude, your mind slows down and your thoughts become organized instead of scattered. You begin to understand yourself better, not in an ego-driven way, but in a disciplined way that allows growth. You recognize where your intentions are pure and where they are mixed, where your worship is sincere and where it has become habitual, where your confidence is genuine and where it is dependent on others. This clarity is uncomfortable at first, but it is also liberating because it gives you direction instead of confusion. Solitude also exposes the difference between loneliness and independence, something many people confuse. Loneliness is the pain of missing people because you depended on them to feel complete, while independence is the calm acceptance of being alone without feeling empty. When you stop needing people, solitude no longer feels like rejection, it feels like space, and space allows growth. It gives you time to reflect, to make better decisions, to strengthen your connection with Allah without distraction, and to build emotional discipline instead of emotional reactions. The strongest believers in history were not formed in constant comfort or endless companionship. They were shaped in moments where there was no applause, no validation, and no reassurance except faith itself. In those moments, intentions were purified and reliance was tested, and that is where true strength was developed. Solitude strips away performance and leaves only sincerity, and sincerity is the foundation of inner power. When you learn to be alone without being shaken, you stop fearing abandonment and start valuing self-mastery. You no longer rush to fill silence with unnecessary relationships or distractions because you understand that being alone is not a flaw to fix, but a state to use wisely. You become selective instead of desperate, thoughtful instead of reactive, and patient instead of impulsive. This transformation does not make you distant from people. It makes you healthier in how you engage with them. Solitude teaches you to listen more to your conscience and less to external noise. It teaches you to recognize your emotional triggers before they control you and to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting instinctively. Over time, this builds a quiet confidence that does not need to announce itself because it is rooted in self-awareness and faith. People often describe this presence as intimidating or intense, not because you are aggressive, but because you are no longer easily influenced or emotionally dependent. When solitude is embraced correctly, it does not isolate you from the world, it prepares you for it. It strengthens your inner foundation so that when you return to people, you do so with clarity and purpose instead of neediness and confusion. You interact without attachment, you give without expectation, and you remain steady regardless of how others behave. This is why solitude, when paired with faith, becomes a powerful teacher. It reveals who you really are, not to discourage you, but to guide you toward who you are capable of becoming. And once you have faced yourself honestly in solitude, you are no longer afraid of being alone, because you have discovered that strength was never found in the crowd, but in the heart that learned to stand firm without it. One of the quiet dangers of needing people is that it slowly changes the way you act, speak, and even worship without you realizing it. When your emotional security depends on human approval, sincerity begins to weaken, not all at once, but gradually, in small compromises that feel harmless at first. You start adjusting yourself to be accepted rather than standing firm to be truthful, and over time, this adjustment becomes a habit that reshapes your character. When people matter too much, intention becomes divided. You are no longer asking only whether Allah is pleased, you are also asking whether people will approve, whether they will understand, whether they will stay. This division may seem subtle, but it has serious consequences because sincerity requires clarity, and clarity cannot exist when the heart is pulled in multiple directions. Many people soften their words not out of wisdom but out of fear. They avoid speaking truth because they are afraid of being disliked. They delay doing what is right because they fear being misunderstood. They tolerate behavior they know is wrong because they are afraid of being alone. None of this is patience or kindness, it is insecurity disguised as gentleness. When you need people, your actions begin to orbit around their reactions. You think carefully before speaking, not to avoid harm, but to avoid rejection. You explain yourself excessively, hoping to be accepted. You justify your intentions repeatedly, hoping to be seen. Over time, this drains your energy and weakens your sense of self because you are no longer acting from conviction but from caution. Sincerity in Islam is not loud and it is not performative. It is quiet, steady, and consistent regardless of who is watching. But when people dependence enters the heart, sincerity becomes conditional. You are sincere when supported, patient when praised, and committed when encouraged. When support disappears, so does consistency. This reveals that reliance was misplaced. When you stop needing people, sincerity begins to recover its strength. You start acting correctly even when no one notices. You speak truth calmly without needing approval. You do good without expecting appreciation. You obey Allah without calculating social consequences. This is not harshness or arrogance, it is alignment, where the heart is finally facing one direction instead of being pulled apart. Many people think sincerity means being blunt or unfiltered, but that is not the case. Sincerity does not remove wisdom or kindness, it removes fear. You can still be gentle, respectful, and considerate without being controlled by the opinions of others. The difference is that your values no longer shift to maintain acceptance. Your character remains intact even when relationships are tested. People dependence also affects worship in subtle ways. When approval matters too much, worship becomes performative. You feel motivated when others are present and lazy when alone. You become confident when praised for your religiosity and discouraged when unnoticed. Over time, the heart forgets that worship was never meant to be validated by people in the first place. When you stop needing people, worship returns to its rightful place. It becomes private before it becomes public. It becomes consistent instead of conditional. You pray because you need Allah, not because you need recognition. This shift strengthens faith in a way no external motivation ever could. A sincere person is not easily manipulated because they are not emotionally dependent. They do not change principles to maintain comfort. They do not abandon truth to preserve relationships. They understand that people may misunderstand them, judge them, or even walk away. And they accept this without resentment because their goal is not to be liked, but to be correct. This level of sincerity makes people uncomfortable, not because it is aggressive, but because it cannot be controlled. When you no longer need people, you cannot be pressured through approval or threatened through rejection. Your actions are guided by conviction, not convenience, and that stability creates a quiet authority that does not demand attention. People often mistake this for coldness, but it is not coldness. It is emotional discipline. It is the ability to care without clinging, to engage without attachment, and to stand firm without hostility. This discipline allows sincerity to flourish because the heart is no longer negotiating its values in exchange for acceptance. When sincerity is restored, peace follows naturally. You no longer replay conversations in your mind. You no longer regret speaking truth. You no longer feel anxious about how you were perceived. Your conscience is clear because your actions are aligned with your beliefs, and alignment creates calm. This is why stopping the need for people is not a loss of connection, but a purification of intention. It removes the noise that distorts sincerity and allows the heart to act with clarity and purpose. When sincerity is intact, faith becomes steady, character becomes strong, and the soul becomes resistant to manipulation. And that is a level of strength few people reach, not because it is complicated, but because it requires letting go of something many are afraid to release: the need to be approved, validated, and emotionally held by others. One of the greatest misunderstandings in the modern world is the belief that strength must always announce itself, that power must be visible, and that confidence must be loud. People often assume that the one who speaks the most, reacts the fastest, or dominates the room is the strongest, when in reality these behaviors usually signal insecurity rather than control. True inner strength does not rush to prove itself because it is not dependent on recognition. When you stop needing people, your nervous system begins to settle, and this calmness changes how you move through the world. You no longer feel the urge to defend every comment, explain every decision, or correct every misunderstanding, not because you are afraid or indifferent, but because you understand that your worth does not require constant confirmation. This understanding brings a quiet stability that cannot be shaken by opinions, criticism, or temporary rejection. Loud reactions often come from fragile foundations. When someone depends heavily on external validation, they react strongly to anything that threatens it. A small criticism feels like an attack. A disagreement feels like disrespect. A delay in attention feels like abandonment. These reactions are not signs of passion or confidence. They are symptoms of emotional dependence. Inner strength, on the other hand, allows space between stimulus and response, and that space is where wisdom lives. Calmness does not mean passivity. It does not mean accepting injustice or remaining silent when truth must be spoken. It means choosing when and how to speak instead of reacting impulsively. A calm person is fully aware of what is happening.